So we're here in Wim's office, and his team tracks the mainline Linux kernel. Wim, why do you guys do that? What was the decision process there, and what's the advantages of doing that?
So one thing that traditionally happened with Linux distribution vendors, or the way that they worked, was that they want to support a given distribution for many numbers of years. And to give you an example, for instance, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5, when they started shipped with a kernel that was based on mainline Linux 2618 at the time that they decided to pick a snapshot of what Linux maintains. And so what happens then is, over a period of many years, they, one, fix bugs, but two, also want to still be more current with what Linux can do in terms of features, the kernel. And so what they tend to then start doing is they start backporting functionality that was written for Linux in future versions and make that work in the older version. So when you actually look at the feature list of RHEL 5, of the kernel that they ship, even though it'll say 2618, if you were to look at the real 2618 kernel from kernel.org and the one that they ship, there literally are near 1 million lines of code difference between the two. So it's really not 2618, it's 26
hybrid
5, right? And so there's a number of things sort of problematic with it. One is that you end up, people always talk about forking kernels and all that stuff. Well, if you want to talk about forks, that's a fork of the kernel, right? Mm-hmm. It's Red Hat's kernel, which is fine. There's no problem with it from that point of view. But it's not a standard Linux kernel that anyone can just go get from kernel.org or something like that. It's really specific to RHEL 5 in this case. So the developers spent a lot of time making code that was written for something else work with this older version, and that means it's very unique. It means that no one else on the planet has tested that code, and so a lot of developers don't want to backport stuff. And the idea that when you stay with 2618 in this case, that's then more stable for a long period of years, doesn't really make sense, right? Because you end up with new features that get introduced on code that really was written for something else. And so, one, you have developers that are spending their time not writing new code but writing backported code. Two, when you find a bug, the bugs are really not relevant to Linux in general. They're relevant to the Red Hat kernel, and a small percentage might also be relevant to what Linux is maintaining or what people are working on today, but the majority of it isn't. And so when we were looking at introducing the Oracle kernel, Unbreakable Enterprise kernel for Exadata for the 8 socket, and which we then made generically available, we basically took the advice from Greg KH, who used to work at SUSE and is now a fellow doing mainline and stable kernel maintenance at the Linux Foundation. And so Greg, many years ago, appealed to the Linux distribution vendors, and this was before we were in the Linux business as well in terms of support. He basically said, look, the distribution vendor should be closer to mainline and rev more frequently, because that's good for the Linux folks, because code developed is the same, bug fixes are very similar, you don't have to spend time backporting, instead of keeping this long release cycle of many years. And so when we did UEK, we were like, well, we should do that. And so when you saw the slide, you basically, when we took the snapshot for 2632 for UEK release 1, we didn't backport features. We just said, okay, this is what's in 2632. We fixed bugs. All these bugs that we found were basically also relevant to upstream kernels, or they were already fixed in upstream kernels, and we didn't have to backport fixes. We could just take the fix and apply it, because there was basically no change to it. So it helped us in terms of maintaining the kernel, because we're not spending time backporting, and it tends to help the Linux community folks when we find problems, right? And so instead of keeping that 2632 base for the next 7 years, we, at the time we announced this, said, well, we will have a update of the kernel every 15 to 18 months. And so in February of this year, we released UEK Release 2. And UEK Release 2 was really based on, the version number is 2639, but it has nothing to do with source code. It has everything to do with Linux packages in Oracle Linux, and in fact obviously also RHEL, that expect a 2.6 version in terms of kernel. So it's not like we took to 639 and started backporting stuff. We basically started with 3.0. We're at 3.0 20 something right now, but it's basically the 3.0 kernel, and so it just shows 2.6.39 as a version, but it's effectively 3.0. And so again, we didn't backport features from newer versions, and so now next year we'll do UVK release 3, and that'll be Linux 3.6, 3.7, something like that. So we're obviously not shipping, you know, what Linux released last week, right? Because there are many issues with that, and you know, we would need to do way more testing and bug fixing and stuff. So we will be behind a number of months, but not 4 years. Right, and we certainly won't be running with code that no one else on the planet runs. We're running what people have written.
And you're testing what the kernel community is typically working with, or very close to it.
Exactly, and so it's good for us. It's good for the Linux kernel in general, because what we find is relevant, and the more we do this, and the more others hopefully at some point will start doing this, the more that what Linux maintains is stable enough, right? It's a chicken and egg problem.
Yep.
Nobody wants to touch mainline for products because, well, it's not stable. But if nobody uses it, how can it be?
Yep.
Because most of the people that work on mainline or are, you know, excited about playing with Linux, they use it on their desktop.
Yep.
Right? There's not much server mainline stuff happening. I think, you know, it's a great way of dealing with it, and so we're not forking the standard kernel. We're fixing bugs, and my developers are focused on mainline development rather than backporting. So they're happy because they're not doing stuff they don't want to work on. And anyway, so everyone wins in that model. And in defense of SLES, they're doing the same thing, right? So SLES 11. They also moved to 3.x. I'm not sure exactly which version, but they've been doing the same thing.
So SUSE's actually on the same track that you guys are in terms of tracking mainline closely.
Yeah, I don't know whether they backport stuff or not, but they're at least much faster in uptake, and they follow a similar model at least. So yeah.
Excellent.